Hey folks, today is January 9th. It is the CBA deadline, and of course that means we have a new CBA, right? Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the CC Report. Today we're talking about the collective bargaining agreement negotiations between the WNBA and the WNBA Players Association. As I mentioned in the intro, today is January 9th. That has been the long agreed upon deadline for a new CBA to be agreed upon between the Players Union and the league. We already know, spoiler alert, that an agreement was not reached. And currently, we are in a state of quote-unquote status quo with between the league and the Players Association. This means that currently there is not a valid collective bargaining agreement that has been agreed upon, and I'm wearing an Iowa Caitlin jersey because technically at the moment there is no collectively bargained WNBA at the moment. So what we're going to do today, we've got two articles to go through. Both of them are on ESPN.com. They're both by Alexa Philippou. We're talking about one article kind of giving us the state of play, and the other article is an interview between Philippou and ESPN and Nneka Ogwumike and Napheesa Collier, two of the player representatives that are in this negotiating process. So we're going to go through all those. I've not read them, but we're just going to kind of look at them together, and we're going to react together to what this state of affairs is. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the general state of play. This article has been long updated by Alexa, and let's just jump into the January 9th updates. Now, I've already said that we are in a state of status quo. What does a status quo mean? For one, not a work stoppage, at least not yet. Under the status quo, the working conditions of the current CBA would be maintained, and the union can continue negotiating. This is something that I predicted a little while ago, or at least I didn't predict necessarily the state of status quo, but I did observe that because there is nothing happening within the next month and change, it's just kind of a dead period in the WNBA offseason, that functionally it doesn't matter when the work stoppage actually, or it doesn't matter when the CBA extension, what the actual end date of that was, because it's not delaying anything. There's no training happening, or at least there's no formal training happening. They're not in training camp or anything. We've already skipped past the expansion draft. That was supposed to happen in December. That has been indefinitely delayed. The next critical event that we would have with the CBA and with the league's offseason would be free agency that starts in February, but that is something that can kind of be fudged around. It's not like a firm date. The next firm date that we have is the WNBA college draft, and that doesn't happen until mid-April. So we've got a situation where it doesn't really matter if there's a CBA or not, because there's no events that are in play that would require a CBA in the first place. So being in the state of status quo, quote unquote, versus there being a CBA extension, it doesn't really matter, because as long as the players have not authorized a strike, and as long as the league has not authorized a work stoppage or a lockout, there still can be negotiations that are continuing every day, and it's not going to affect anybody one way or the other. So that's where we're at with the status quo. And according to this article, the next paragraph, the league has not been contemplating a lockout, but a strike has been considered for players. So it sounds like the league is not currently considering the lockout option. And if there is a strike, it's going to be on the players. And I think that we'll probably see that even though a strike is still definitely on the table for the players, it's not an option that they're prepared to exercise just yet. Let's continue on. Both sides continue to be far apart as they work toward a new deal, particularly on the issue of what revenue sharing and what such a system would look like. A source told ESPN that the league has yet to respond to a recent proposal from the union because it wasn't significantly different from the WNBA-PA's previous offer. Okay, so we're still in the middle of negotiations here. The revenue sharing is going to be the biggest deciding factor. It is the thing that is causing such a holdup in these CBA negotiations. I think that we're going to discuss more about that. The longer both sides go without a deal, the greater the likelihood that the league will need to conduct a condensed offseason where 2-team expansion drafts, free agency, and the college draft all must occur within a few weeks or months. Yes, this is kind of what I was talking about before. We've already delayed the expansion draft. That was supposed to take place in December. Now the next big thing on the calendar is going to be free agency, which is supposed to take place in February. But if we don't have a collective bargaining agreement by February, obviously that can't take place. So we're squeezing the timeline more and more until we get to a point of critical mass. And that point of critical mass will probably come, before the college draft, which occurs in April, because obviously we're all familiar. College draft happens, then there's about a week off, and then training camp starts. Preseason starts 2 weeks after training, or the week after training camp starts in some cases, and then we're right into the season 2 weeks after that. So there is going to come a point of critical mass where you can no longer continue to condense the schedule. So we're probably, in my estimation, we're probably looking at that point of critical mass being somewhere in the mid to late March region, because again, you have to fit the expansion draft, you have to fit free agency, and you have to fit the college draft into a span of potentially 3 or 4 weeks. And not only is it a free agency period, but it's a free agency period that is the most critical pre-agency period that the league has ever seen. So we're going to have to fit all of that in the space of a couple of weeks. It's going to be chaos when it happens, and there's going to be a lot more CC reports when that happens. So that's the update, the January 9th update. What are players at Unrivaled saying about CBA negotiations? Okay, I have not read this, so let's just go through it. Revenue sharing and housing, the latter emerged as a flashpoint in early December when a proposal from the league no longer included providing housing remained the biggest priority for WNBA players. The WNBA PA has proposed a revenue sharing system in which players receive about 30% of the gross revenue, whereas the league is offering for them to receive in excess of 50% of net revenue, a fundamental difference that has held up negotiations. It's about systems, and it's hard to go anywhere when you can't even agree on that. You want Applebee's, I want Chipotle. We can't even figure out what our order is. That's a huge discrepancy in perspective. Okay, so let's just go through this real fast. I find the Applebee's Chipotle comparison to be not like the best metaphor, but I think that what the players are trying to say is they're not even speaking the same language at this point. The difference between gross revenue, or revenue before expenses are taken out, versus net revenue, which is revenue after expenses are taken out, there's a massive difference in proposal, and there's a massive difference in just concept of how this revenue share is going to work. Currently, in our current collective bargaining agreement, there is revenue sharing of a kind. There is revenue sharing, and it is designed on the net revenue sharing. But the problem is that what the league considers to be expenses, you continue to, they take marketing expenses out of the number, they take promotional expenses out of the number, they take operating expenses out of the number, they take all these expenses out of the number first, and what is left over for the players is something like 7% of the overall gross revenue. This is a number that is extremely low, especially when you take into consideration other leagues, not just women's leagues, but other leagues in contemporary being about 50% gross revenue being split from the player base and the league. And additionally, you also see that the league pocketing a lot of money, and I think that Nneka is going to say something about this in future, so I'm going to leave it to that. But this is a fundamental difference between the views of the player base versus the views of the league in terms of how to approach revenue sharing, and I think that it's the players' contention that the league is just not they're not being imaginative or creative enough when it comes to their ability to even conceive of how to do this revenue sharing thing, because this net revenue share is the way it's always been done. Let's continue on. The league's proposal to eliminate team-provided housing, which has been required since the league's first CBA in 1999, is an issue Brittany Sykes said that has led to players feeling disrespected throughout negotiations. They are trying to take something away from us in our CBA that is something that benefits everyone across the board. They're trying to take away housing and cars. If you try to take something away, what's in place of it? You up the money, but just because you gave us $100,000 more doesn't mean that a housing complex is going to sublease for us, especially for 4 months. Is the contract guaranteed? Where if a player gets traded, they still got to deal with the apartment. Some said if the league reinstated team housing into the new CBA deal, there might be space for the union to give in on some other areas. They need to keep housing. That's a huge thing. They can't get rid of that. But if they say, okay, then we're going to extend the season. You need to play more games. It's going to take more months of the year. I'd be okay with that, for an example. Okay, so here's the deal about housing. And it is, I personally believe that the league took away the housing from previous iterations of the contract specifically to use it as a bargaining chip. In order for them to give back housing, they're going to have to receive some concessions, and this is like a standard negotiating tactic. And so it appears, from what we're seeing here, it appears like that approach has worked. We've already got players saying that they're going to be willing to extend the season, for example, in this one particular player's estimation, in order to get housing back. I personally find that the housing situation, I find that to be petty. I find that to be a drop in the bucket for ownership, and I also find that removing player housing from the requirements is only going to create another avenue for a competitive advantage for some teams that are going to be willing to provide player housing versus teams that are not going to be willing to provide player housing. So to me, it seems just like the league is shooting itself in the foot if they actually intended to remove player housing from the equation, because at that point, teams like the Valkyries, teams like the Liberty, teams like the Mercury, teams like the Fever are going to be willing to provide player housing. They have the funds and they have the management team together to provide player housing for players. And there are some other teams that have historically been reticent to provide, player facilities, and this would also include player housing, and so it just gives another competitive advantage to some of those teams that are going to be willing to provide player housing in future. So I really don't see this as an issue. I think that player housing ultimately will be included in whatever the new CBA looks like. I'm really not too concerned about it. To me, as is obvious from what's happening in the article, it's just a negotiating tactic. Paige Beckers added, "We've had these talks and we've sort of come up with an idea on just what we're not willing to bargain and go back and forth with. Once we think the other side has showed a little bit of compromise in meeting us halfway on what we deserve, I think that's when the negotiations are settled." Okay, so this is just kind of another, right now, there's been a lot of posturing in terms of who is willing to compromise, who's not willing to compromise. Caitlin famously talked in the Olympic camp about the need for compromise. And I think that especially in the long term, if these negotiations don't work out and if this goes the distance and it goes to arbitration, all that sort of stuff, there needs to be a paper trail of teams and the player base being willing to compromise and talking about the willing to compromise, and there being some places where you can give and some places where you cannot give. And this is just an example, I think, black and white, of where players are saying we can give on this, that, and the other, but we need to be met halfway. And there are some areas in which we cannot give, which is obviously revenue sharing. Okay, let's move on. to the second article. This one is going to be a little bit longer. It is a CBA Q&A with Nneka and Napheesa and Katie Barnes. So we already know there's not going to be a new CBA. That was disclosed by Stewie. We're entering a league, a status quo. And so let's just go and let's react together, shall we? Over the past few months, more information has been reported about the leagues and the players' proposals, with numbers and information changing frequently. But how would you describe the state of negotiations? Napheesa says, obviously, we've hoped that we'd be a lot farther along than we are. It's been about 15 months at this point. At the same time, we have to stay strong in what our values are and what we're standing for. The players feel really united right now. We're waiting for the league to come back. We're not going to accept a bad deal. We're waiting for the league to come back and respond to our thoughtful and reasonable proposals. Ogwumike says, Fee's right. I'm really proud of how professional and really patient we've been as a collective, but quite frankly, this is my third CBA that I've been part of, so I feel like I've been a part of 3 different eras, and this is by far the most transformational era that we've been a part of. But the players that we've seen, or lack thereof, does not match what the players have, but the progress that we've seen does not match what the players have built for this league. I'm very grateful that our players continue to stay united. Our fight's been way more about a paycheck or headline and higher salaries. It's definitely for us to be well represented and valued in this upcoming agreement. In terms of where negotiations are, it's very upsetting and disappointing. The tone of the negotiations coming from the league, it's very dismissive, very disrespectful. You know, they've said over and over that the players don't understand the business, and for them to put a blanket statement like that over players who clearly we do. We are very smart, educated women. We know what we've been asking for. We know that it's not too much like they're saying. So that's been a very disappointing for them to have the tone of the conversations, like Nneka said, where for both sides to be benefiting and reaping the benefits of that. Okay, so there's a lot of fluff in there. There's a lot of kind of like we're feeling disrespected and all that sort of stuff. What I'm getting from this is that the players continue to remain united on the points that we've already talked about in the past, specifically about revenue share. There are some people out there, people that I respect, that believe that the union, that the league is playing the long game with the intent of breaking the players' union and getting them to acquiesce to the league's way of seeing things. And it appears so far that that is not happening, that the league and the player base, that the player base is remaining united, specifically on the revenue sharing front. I think that right now the player base has not felt the maximum amount of pain that it might feel if a strike were to actually occur. Once people start losing actual real life dollars, that tends to make a difference. But the problem is that there are so many alternate avenues of them making money that they've already had a situation, they've already had the opportunity to plan for that money that the WNBA pays them to not be available. We see players playing overseas. We see players taking coaching positions. We see players playing in Unrivaled, obviously. We see players playing in Athletes Unlimited. We see this new Project B that's forming. And so all these alternative ways of making money enable the player base to continue to coalesce and to continue to maintain their ask, even if the ask is something that the league feels is too high or whatever. It reduces the league's ability to enact pain upon the player base in order for them to sort of come around to their way of seeing things. And so because of that, we've got a situation where the player base is, I mean, at this point, it looks like they're not going to break. It looks like they know exactly what they want. And until they get to a number that they feel is reasonable, they're not going to acquiesce. So that's what I'm getting from that. This sort of disrespect thing, whatever. This is a business. Who cares? What do you see as the greatest impediment in terms of making the progress that you both say you would like to see? This is going to be the revenue share thing. So yes, we made it very clear for more than a year that our priority is most certainly a new salary system that is tied to a meaningful share of the revenue. I, as a player, don't feel like I've seen any negotiation in good faith that reflects stepping somewhere closer to the middle, as we have in not just the CBA, but in CBAs before. Fee is right. It's the tone. It's the process. It feels like there's a bit of a by-the-book, antiquated approach to negotiations that's being used on the league side, and it foils drastically in comparison to where we are at as a league, the types of players that come in here and changing the game. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of speculation about the relationship between Kathy and the players. I really do feel like that's taking away from the point, because our focus is not about feelings about any individuals across the negotiating table, rather the commitment on both sides, as we've said many times before. We want to ensure. Okay, so they are trying to get away from this whole Kathy versus Fee individual, like, you know, that whole thing that kind of bubbled up at the beginning. My personal belief is that Kathy is not super involved in these negotiations. I could be completely wrong, but it seemed from the tea leaves that I'm reading, it seems like Adam Silver and his people have sort of taken over the negotiations. And if that's the case, if that's true, then, you know, Kathy doesn't really enter into it. However, talking about revenue sharing and kind of the approach that the league is taking, this is what I was talking about before, where it's like the league has always done things a specific way, therefore they're not open to doing things a new way. They're not open to the idea of gross revenue sharing versus net revenue sharing. They're not open to those ideas. And this is actually probably the most worrisome part of the article, or the part of this whole deal, is that the league just doesn't seem to be open to having the conversation about gross revenue share versus net revenue share, especially since the net revenue share number is so much lower of the overall pie than what the gross revenue share would be. So, I mean, as long as we're at a standstill there, I mean, it's not easy to see how things can progress. So that's really worrisome. If they can't get past this hurdle, or if they can't find some way around this hurdle, maybe, you know, even making the salary so big that it functionally replaces the gross revenue share, something like that. You know, if they can't figure out a way to get past that, it's very worrisome. The players reportedly are looking for 30% of the gross revenue. What went into the decision to ask for that percentage as opposed to net revenue? Napheesa says, we can't really talk about the numbers that we're asking for, but in terms of just what we're looking for, we think that something that we think accurately depicts our value, especially when it comes to net versus gross, is what we've been talking about. We're just looking for a new salary system, something that's going to be a big win for us, something that represents our value, and something that we think that is represented through gross and not net. Okay, so the 30% number that was banded around, and the league kind of came out with a counter argument saying that they're going to lose, I think the number was $700 million per year if they did 30% of gross revenue. I personally believe that just as the league kind of took away housing as a negotiating tactic, the starting number of 30% is a little bit high. I mean, it's already a major concession for the player base to have started with 30% instead of the requisite 49 or 50%, which is what other leagues receive, and other leagues both in the sphere of women's sports and also in the sphere of the NBA, the Major League Baseball, the NFL, the leagues that the WNBA is trying to compete with in terms of television marketing and all that sort of stuff. So that's already a significant concession. But on top of that, I think the 30% is just their starting point for the negotiation. I think that the winning number is going to probably be somewhere around the 20% gross number, which is a significant concession as well, especially when you start getting into the math and crunching the numbers. I've done it. I'm not going to bring it up here, but it's a significant concession. Meanwhile, on the other side, the league's proposal bumps up their net percentage to somewhere around 14% of gross revenue, which is closer, but not yet close enough to bridge the gap. And so if they want to continue to insist on the number being a net percentage, they're going to have to up the offer of the net percentage in order to match what I believe would be about a 20% gross number. I think that is generally been arrived upon amongst kind of the commentators as a reasonable number, a reasonable compromise for both sides. It has been reported that the league has said that your proposal would result in a $700 million. There you go, a $700 million loss over a certain number of years. From your perspective, how does the WNBA plan balance the players' desire for compensation with a desire to run a sustainable business in the long term? Okay, here we go. Here's Nneka. It's interesting that was propagated because a lot of players' first questions to that would be losing, or the league would be losing money, was if that was also money that was inclusive or exclusive of expansion fee payments in the calculation. Secondly, we're wondering if these same people have looked at franchise valuations. We can run the kind of numbers on the teams that were sold for $10 million 6 years ago. She's specifically referencing the New York Liberty, which was sold for $10 million in 2019. And are worth nearly $500 million today. That is not an exaggeration. The New York Liberty currently are worth approximately $500 million. We are wondering if any of those things are factors. The league and the teams saying that they're losing money is like saying their pockets are empty while you're also holding the keys to a brand new Ferrari. And Nneka is correct in this assessment. The numbers that she is using she is not lying. The New York Liberty were purchased for, I think it was $11 million in 2019, but the valuation of the New York Liberty has increased 20-fold. I'm not exaggerating, 20-fold over the span of the last 6 years. So the Liberty may be an outlier, but we already know that new expansion teams, the get-in price just to start the conversation, not even necessarily be a winning expansion bid, but just to start the conversation, the get-in price is $150 million, which is a massive amount of money in terms of valuation versus where the teams were just a scant 6 years ago. So we're looking at a massive explosion in value, and I kind of am agreeing with the players in that the proposals from the league are not reflecting that massive explosion of value. And I think ultimately what Nneka is wondering, or what Nneka is asking for here, is for the league to show its work, open its books, and let's see where your math is coming from, because the math that they are doing on their side is completely different. And so we've got two competing claims, but there's no actual evidence to back up the WNBA's claim that they're going to be losing $700 million with a with a 30% gross proposal. And so I think that's pretty reasonable. What Nneka is asking for is just for them to show their work. I think that if it were true that the league would be losing so much money that we would have that there would be some different discussions happening, but because the league is not showing its work, that's where we come into into a problem. Okay, let's continue on. Breanna Stewart said earlier Thursday that a formal extension would not be signed before the Friday deadline. The status quo would be. What's the benefit of that approach? She's realistic. It's not looking like we're going to get anything done. Extensions are something that come to fruition when we feel like progress is being made. Now there's still time before tomorrow to see if maybe we'll get a response, but right now it's a question of if they're willing to get a deal done. Right now it appears that the evidence is showing that the league is trying to run out the clock. Okay, so this is like not the best answer to hear in the world, because you've got Nneka basically saying that the league is no longer negotiating. I don't know if that's necessarily the case so much as they just don't intend to respond to this specific offer, since the league feels that specific offer that they've put on the table is not substantially different than previous offers. But it is very important that the league and the Players Association do continue to negotiate, because when the negotiations end, or when they are not at the table any longer, that is when you start talking about a strike. And so as long as the negotiations are continuing to happen, that is going to be absolutely key in order for us to continue to have hope that a season is going to take place. And this answer is worrisome to me. However, the general tone from the Players Association and from the league has been that negotiations are continuing. when you say that you're waiting on the league's response, does that mean you're waiting on a counter proposal in response to your latest proposal? Yes. You've talked a lot about the progress that has not been made. How would you say that any progress that has been made between the union and the league? How would you describe that? There has been some small progress that has been made, but on all the things that the players have been really vocal about, especially from the very beginning, there's not been progress made. Those are the big issues that we said from the beginning are our biggest priorities. And with those, we're at a standstill. We really wish that there were some more areas of agreement. There are certainly some areas of agreement, that is a fact. But right now, if we had had fewer areas of disagreement, especially about the things that players hold as a top priority, we probably would not be nearing the end of another extension. Unfortunately, this is where we are. This is the nature of negotiations at times. But we are standing firm on getting a good deal done. What are those areas of agreement? Things like maternity, childcare, charter planes, maintaining those, but I think, frankly, the list is not very long. Again, revenue sharing is the big thing here, and until it sounds like they're not using this, they're not yet on the page of using the same model. They're using two different conceptions of what revenue sharing is. This actually is progress from where we were at a few months ago, when the league wouldn't even consider revenue sharing, let alone, being bandying about different versions of revenue share. But until they resolve the net versus gross, it's not going to functionally matter unless the league proposes a net revenue share that is so gigantically big that it encompasses the gross figure that they're looking for. So until we kind of resolve that hurdle, net versus gross, it looks like that's kind of where we are. And this is the nature of negotiations. At some point, they're going to figure it out. Both of you are involved in other leagues and have stakes in those leagues to different degrees. You also sit in the negotiating table for the WNBA Players Association. How would you respond to those who say it's a conflict of interest? This is a good question. Nneka, I feel as though the opportunities for women in a lot of ways have been limited, when perhaps the one opportunity we've built is now matching the social consciousness. I feel it almost feels as though others can be omitted or others are not as valid, and I really do stand against that. We've seen so much amazing progress and all the opportunities that we've been afforded. We entered into this league with our vets telling us to play overseas. Athletes Unlimited is in the mix. Two of our union's leaders have created a league for players that values player compensation and salary. Now we have more opportunity with a global aspect of the game in Project B. I just feel like the threat of change and the threat of something new, especially to women, is always going to shake things up. It's always going to be disruptive, but anything that is more opportunities for women in sport is good. And I really implore others to understand that, because there is no conflict when we're creating opportunity. Nneka, this is not an answer to the question. This does not answer the question of a conflict of interest. And here's why a conflict of interest is actually so important. It is because when you are finally faced in the negotiating room with a deal that is good for the player base of the WNBA, but it is bad for the player base or bad for the business structure of Unrivaled, right? You are not going to be the person that is optimally positioned to make the correct decision for the players in the WNBA. For example, if, let's just say hypothetically, the league came and said, here is the perfect offer. We are going to give you the gross revenue share. We are going to give you 30% of gross revenue. Right now, the deal is on the table. However, in exchange, we are going to ask for you, for the player base, to exclusively participate in the WNBA and to renege on any other league that you're participating in. We feel like this is an important step because it is, it protects our players. It protects if we're making such an investment in our player base, it's within our rights to make sure that player base is healthy for the seasons that they're going to participate in. Okay, so in that hypothetical situation, Napheesa Collier, you are forced to choose between the deal that you are seeking for the WNBA and the continued existence of Unrivaled as an entity. So at that point, you are either going to take the deal, which you should, in order to make sure that your entire player base is provided for, and do your job as a leader in these negotiations. You are going to be choosing between your player base and taking the deal, or rejecting the deal and doing the right thing from a business owner standpoint. You would be obligated to reject the deal, in fact, because you are beholden to your shareholders and to your investors who gave you millions of dollars in order to start this league and continue to operate in its best interests. So at that point, that is the conflict of interest, and that is functionally how it could impact your ability to continue these negotiations in good faith. Now, am I saying that that is going to happen? No, I'm not saying that. Am I saying that that is something that has the potential of happening? Yes. Yes, it is. It is something that has the potential of happening. And until you can resolve that, then you are not the best person to be at these negotiation tables. And this answer here is not a good answer for what people have observed as a conflict of interest. The last sentence, though, I really implore others to understand that there is no conflict when we're creating more opportunity. That is actually the opposite of the truth. If you are creating other opportunities, there is conflict with the opportunity that already exists. So this is nonsense. This is a nonsense answer. This is not a good answer. Sorry. It's just not. I am on the player side on this, but this is not a good answer. Nneka, you talked about adding opportunities. I think the natural question becomes, does that lessen the players' need for the WNBA? Yes, it does. That's the whole problem. I think as players, it gives us even more leverage. The WNBA is something that everyone has looked up to and has grown up watching. It's obviously the height of women's basketball. Nobody is trying to get rid of the WNBA. We all want this to work. We just want to be valued in the work that we're doing. So we want to reach that pinnacle together. So that's all we're asking for. No one is trying to replace the WNBA or anything like that. We want women to succeed. And I think these other opportunities just give us more leverage, basically, to make them do the right thing and pay us what we're owed. This could be so transformational. We just didn't have the leverage that we have now. We didn't have other opportunities to grow, play in other places, and with that, I think that it gives more leverage to be able to add. Okay, look, this is exactly what I was talking about at the beginning of the video, the beginning of our discussion. The ability for players to play elsewhere, it defeats the ability of the WNBA to negotiate, and it makes the WNBA have to come to the negotiating table more. That much is true. However, the conflict between the other opportunities and the WNBA, by its nature, makes it less necessary for players to play in the WNBA, obviously. So at that point, the answer to the question is yes, it does lessen the players' need for the WNBA, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because it gives them more ability at the negotiating table. Caitlin Clark at the USA Basketball Camp talked about the importance of both sides needing to compromise, and Stewie today said we can come and find a mutual ground. What do you think about those messages? We absolutely agree. We just feel like the league is not agreeing. I mean, we think that we have been very compromising. We're not asking for anything crazy. I think we've been respectful, realistic with what we're asking. We are compromising. Just feels like that's not being reciprocated by the other side. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so basically they're talking about, like, we've already talked about it before, the need for compromise. They're positioning themselves as being able to compromise on other things. They were giving examples of their ability to compromise, etc., but they need to make sure that they are all on the same page on revenue share. Great. Where would you say that the players have compromised so far? Details of these proposals can't necessarily be discussed in full. When it comes to our priorities, that's not something that we're moving on, but we have been doing some bending on our share of the revenue and understanding how we face certain things. Even with the new salary structure, we've been willing to come up with different ways to be creative about the revenue sharing model. Okay, great. So that means that they're fungible on the 30% number, basically. Okay. What I'm hearing from you is an element of frustration. You've spoken about being disrespected, feeling dismissed, and this extension expiring and beginning in a stage of status quo. A work stoppage could happen at any time. I just want to ask you directly, is a strike imminent? Here's Nneka. I think that we have been doing a really good job of making sure that players have been informed and ready for whatever. And because of all that, all options are certainly on the table. As leadership, our responsibility is not to propose that's what's going to happen, but a union is always prepared for that type of action. When we as an executive committee receive a recommendation from our staff and our legal team that we may determine a strike is warranted, then that's what's going to happen. So I think that our membership's confidence in us as leadership, our unity as a collective, is strong. We recognize our power and responsibility in that. We are trusted to use that power, but first and foremost, we are committed to the negotiations. That is not an answer. That is word salad. That is nothing. My understanding from reading other articles is that a strike is not imminent so long as they are continuing to be at the table, and that I think that Stewie is on record as saying that she thinks that a deal can get done. Adam Silver is on record as saying that he thinks that a deal can get done. Fee is on record as saying that she thinks that a deal can get done. But this is not an answer. This is legal. This is gobbledygook. Part of the conversation about these negotiations has been rooted in the unraveling of the relationship between Kathy and the players over time. This is not important. It's not Nneka says it's not personal. This is business. I feel like we actually got that from Kathy. It's about the business, right? Okay, great. So there's no personal animosity, or there may be personal animosity, but they're not letting it get in the way of the negotiations. That's fine. Whatever. Okay. So let's coalesce this long discussion, which has taken 40 minutes, into a few key points. Key point number one is that the negotiations are continuing. We are in a state of status quo right now, which means that there is no date that is set as a deadline for a new collective bargaining agreement to be agreed upon. However, that does not matter so long as people are still at the negotiating table. The deadline, so to speak, is the point of critical mass where it no longer becomes feasible to do all of the preseason stuff and still have a season. So we're talking somewhere in mid-March, late March being the point of no return in terms of delaying a season. So that is number one. As long as they're still at the table talking, we're in good shape. Point number two, revenue sharing is and always has been the sticking point. And currently we are talking about a sticking point between two visions, one being gross revenue share, one being net revenue share. We've gone through the specifics of that. I don't need to do it again, but basically, if we can find a way either through this obstacle or around it, it's going to go a long way toward making the deal get done. And finally, is that the players' union is united still on this revenue share issue. They're not breaking. It seems like the league kind of has its feet in the mud as well. So this is going to take some time. This is going to take some doing. But there is too much at stake for this not to get done. And I think ultimately, I think Stewie said that the other day, is that there's too much at stake for this not to get done. So at some point, one of these two, they're playing chicken right now, but one of these two factions is going to blink. My money is on the league blinking, frankly, but either way, somebody is going to blink because everybody has said there's too much at stake to not get a deal done. So that's where we stand. And I just have to say on a personal note, and I know that there were a lot of people that agree with me, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of keeping track of these CBA negotiations. I'm tired of all of this, talk back and forth, gross versus net, revenue sharing, housing, blah, 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 blah. I don't like math at all. These negotiations have had me do more math than I've done in a long, long time in order to kind of keep up with what's going on. I am sick and tired of this, and I'm sure that the players are too, and I'm sure the league is as well. And as fans, I know that we're all tired of this. So my general sense of how this is going is that they're going and we're in pretty good shape. And I think there is going to be a season for sure. But I do think that it's going to take some time. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that just kind of are not interested in the details anymore, and they just want to know when we've got a season to look forward to, and count me in that book. So this has been the CC Report. I know it's been long. I'm sure it's been kind of rambly, but I just wanted to go through these articles and react with you. I wanted to do a big episode on the CBA. and we've done it. Hopefully I can replace this Iowa jersey with a Fever jersey in our next video, because that's, we got to have a league, we got to have a season, and hopefully these negotiations go down that road. So until next time, this has been CC Report. I'll catch you guys in the next one.